Course 1 Math. Today is not Lesson 11 as you may have expected. Today is Investigation 1 on page 54 and it goes to about page 57. And you might ask, why do we stop for this? Or normally we wouldn't stop for this, would we? Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't stop for these extra investigations. The lessons are important. I want to make sure we have time for them, but man, I can't help but think that this is a super important lesson. We want to learn how to read and create the different ways we can display data or information. Talk about what a frequency table is, a histograph, and a survey, and maybe get practice making one or two of these. First of all, do you remember what the word frequency means? Frequency refers to how often, how many times. How frequently do you go to McDonald's each month? How many people made the basket? How many? How often? Okay? So Mr. Lawson, a teacher, makes a frequency table to record their math scores. On a test, he listed the intervals of scores he wanted to tally, and then he graded each test. He made a tally mark for each test in the corresponding row. So we made a chart, a table or chart here with 3 columns labeled number correct, so 19 to 20 correct, 17 to 18 correct, and all the way down, a tally column, and then frequency lists the tally in a numeral that's easier to read. So he decided what were good intervals, and then as he graded, he would make a tally every time a student scored in the range from that column. And then at the end, he totals it up and says, okay, 5 plus 4, 9, 5 plus 2, 7, 4, and 2. Why use tallies? Why have this column? Because he did it as he was grading, and it's hard to keep a track of how many frequency as you go without using these tallies, because you can continue. You don't know how many there will be, and that's okay with tallies, but you can't do that. You have to keep erasing and rewriting and erasing and rewriting these. So he's created this frequency table. He's finished grading. He counts the number of tallies, puts them in the final row. The table shows a lot of things. For example, that there's 9 students who scored either 19 or 20. And that means that, for the most part, students did pretty well. It's a quick way to read how many kids fell in this bucket versus, how many in the bottom. So one easy conclusion he can make is that he taught this unit pretty well, that students gathered the information, or maybe the information was too easy because very few were being challenged and did very well. So it could mean a lot of things based on the data. He created what's called a frequency table, a how often graph, chart, whatever you want to say, frequency table example up there. For you, I'd like to then have you answer numbers 1 through 4 as part of your homework, but let's move on to histograms. Using the information in the frequency table, Mr. Lawson creates this histogram to display the results in a different way. How do you feel this display shows the data differently to you? How does it read differently than the frequency table from page 54? I think it's far more visual, where you see a stack that reminds us of that many more kids versus this many kids scored, right? This would be better for like a presentation. Now notice some of the components of a proper bar graph. You need a title that labels all the data that's being discussed in the graph at the top. And then we have this, what's called a y-axis. An axis is one of the 2 lines of the either up or down or side to side of a graph or chart. And this is the x-axis. It's the horizontal side to side line, x-axis. And on those, notice they've got numbers explaining what's the scale he's chosen and labels for each of those. So we read this 1 through 10 tell us how many kids scored those. So this would be 1 kid, we would put a bar there, but we know that in the 13 to 14 range, there were 2, so they put it up here, which corresponds with the frequency. That's how many kids. And then if there were 4 in the 15 to 16 range, we look for that column or whatever on the x-axis, and we go up only to where it says 4, and then 7, and then the tallest was 9. They chose 10 as their top for the y-axis because they knew that there was no numbers above 10 and it's a nice even number. Notice also we've got that break, kind of like we had in yesterday's thermometer. That means we're going to jump right to kids with 13 or more, and we're not going to bother with all the bars of 0 to 12 that no one was in. A histogram is what we're looking at as a special type of bar graph. It displays the data in equal size intervals, no spaces between bars. So bar graph, oftentimes, I guess the big difference is you'll put a bar here, and then you'll break, and you'll put a bar here, and you'll break, and you'll put a... So there's these spaces in between. And histograms, they put them right up next to each other, and we make equal spaces so that this is equal to this is equal to this. They're all only 2 apart. Okay? We mentioned the break in the horizontal line here. And then you'll answer numbers 5 through 7 using that histogram, including like which interval had the lowest frequency of scores. You would again say 13 to 14. And the graph does a nice visual job of showing that. Number 8, you have to make your own frequency table and histogram, but I'm going to say number 8 we're not going to do today. So you're just going to do 1 through 7 so far, no 8. We will do our own kind of survey where we get to collect data about a population. It'll be your class members. Usually you don't collect data from every member. We will because our class is so small, but sometimes if they want to know information about, like, let's say all of Stoddard, we did this as a school. You go around with a clipboard or whatever, and you get as many people as you can. That'll be your sample. And from the sample, you draw conclusions about the whole population. You know, based on the fact that I've talked to these 50 people, they gave me this information, I'm going to say that that stands for all 500 or something like that. Let's go to almost our last page here. Finish up talking about surveys and things. So they have a new sports-related table, and this is a bar graph. How can you tell? There's spaces. That's your first being able to tell that there's spaces in between each vertical bar. So not a histogram. And then they show what that would look like as a bar graph. But you can do numbers 9 through 12. Okay? So 1 through 7, 9 through 12. Read to yourself what a closed versus open option survey is. Basically, closed option, you give all the options and they can't pick their own. Now, I love these investigate further questions. So I'm thinking letter A. No, not letter A. Letter B. I want to do letter B here, where you're conducting a survey of favorite foods of class members. If you choose to conduct a closed option survey, you have to determine which food choices they can choose. If you want to make it open, you have to be prepared for a lot of different things. I recommend using the closed option, okay, so that you can't get too many and maybe not have any duplicates and then have very difficult data to create. Okay, so far we've got numbers 1 through 7 working with frequency tables. Then we have 9 through, and also histograms, 9 through 12, working with more frequency table, another example of a bar graph. Then letter B, let's do C, and that's good. So you've got all of these to do, as well as B and C, please. Talk to me if you have questions. Definitely work together at a big table. Get confident and get comfortable with these different ways to gather information.